right, good evening. Welcome to the September 12th, 2022 special meeting of the Norfolk City Council. I will call the meeting to order and call your attention to the Open Meetings Act posted here in the council chambers. If you now please join me in rising for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Granquist.
Here.
Arns.
Here.
Merrill.
Here.
McCarthy.
Here.
Murin.
Here.
Jackson.
Here.
Clausen.
Here.
Hildebrand.
Here.
Okay, with that, I would look for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So, second?
Motion second. If no discussion, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Would then look for a motion to approve the full agenda.
So moved.
Motion second. If no discussion, please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Okay, that takes us to items 8, 9, and 10 on the council agenda under public hearings and related action. And because each of these hearings are related to the City of Norfolk budget, we will hold them all together. And so I will open these public hearings to review the City of Norfolk's fiscal year 2022 to 23 municipal budget, and the hearing to review the City of Norfolk's fiscal year 2022 to 23 proprietary budget regarding water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater, and the public hearing to receive comments regarding changing the tax request for the 2022-23 fiscal year from the amounts for the 2021-22 fiscal year. And to kick off this public hearing, we will first hear from Andy Colvin, our city administrator. Andy, good evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is I think the one time a year that I get up and stand up at this podium, I believe. So, what I'm going to do this evening for you is go through a presentation. It's similar to past presentations that I've given to you all before. A little bit different this year. There's been a few things that we've decided to add, as this is kind of a working and living, breathing document from year to year. But I'll try to be as brief as I can. And I just want to maybe give a little bit of a shout out to the staff that helped prepare this budget. This is by no means a single person that puts this together. There's a lot of hours, there's a lot of back room and back end work that has to happen to try to make a document like this come forth. And that is before and after you all get to sit and consider these considerations and the budget asks and all the projects that we have going on. So we have a very, very talented team of department heads, and especially to the finance staff that work very hard to put all this together. So many of them are in this room, and I believe that tonight, if there is any detail, anything you want to go into, any questions you have, between everybody here, we can get those questions answered for you. I'm never going to claim to be the one end-all be-all expert on this budget. I know enough to be dangerous and to try to help steer things forward, but there's folks in here that can get into as much detail as you would like. So feel free, and we'll get to the part for questions as well. I assume this is for me to control this. Okay, so as I have done in past years, we'll just kind of do a quick run through of the past year and some of the things that we've worked on and some of the things that we've helped put together. Community engagement and public relations is one of those that we've always strived to improve from year to year. This has been a council goal for the last several years. Improvements that we've made to our website, social media, trying to get the public engaged with what we're doing and more aware, whether that's what our water and street folks are doing, some of the projects we have going on, or just putting out general information about city meetings. Public Works, transfer station is probably one of the big ones that we have, and that construction did kick off this last year. I believe that's going to be wrapping up this fall, I think, for the most part, by the end of this year. So that'll be an exciting one that I think will offer a lot of, make it safer and make it much better for folks to utilize our transfer station. Property maintenance code is another council goal. 13 structures that the city worked on this year ordered to be removed. And we're continuing that identification of properties as the council has asked us to do that every year. Parks and Recreation and Trails, we continued the final design and engineering for Johnson's Park, and we actually began construction of the North Fork River Restoration Project, which many of you have seen taking place with the drop structures. We began, I believe, today with the turf, Memorial Field turf. That was one to put artificial turf at the baseball field and the bullpen. So that's an exciting one to see happen. We are, as everybody knows, construction of the East Benjamin Avenue Trail, and we anticipate that is going to be completed this fall. And as far as also in parks, we've implemented online registration options for activities programs and all the city-owned amenities going forward from now and into the future. Public safety, we have awarded a contract for final design of the police station expansion project. That did happen at this last council meeting. We've completed the renovations for the Joint Dispatch Center, and we've also completed the parking lot expansion at the police station. Street maintenance and construction, we have significantly increased over the last few years the amount of concrete work and concrete repairs and street construction that we've done. 18th Street, we've done mill and overlay projects, and all those are some of the great investments that this council has made in the community to try to ramp up some of those, to try to preserve our system and help us keep up with the maintenance that we have going forward. Just over 1.3 million in street concrete repairs by contract. That is not the work done by city crews that you see out, for instance, on Riverside. This is the ones that we've hired, such as 18th Street. We did complete $1.2 million in street asphalt work. That was all this work that we saw done downtown at the Mill and Overlay project last year. And we've continued work on concrete panel repairs in key locations. And we did begin construction of Benjamin Avenue from 1st Street to 13th Street this year as well. Economic development, a few things for that council goal. As we all know, Norfolk Crush has begun construction. That'll have a significant economic impact on our whole region. Applied for and received a grant from MPPD for due diligence and master planning for 230 acres in the Northeast Industrial Area. The council did here a couple years ago finish extending water and sewer infrastructure to that area in order to encourage growth. And so following up to that, we're doing some master planning to try to encourage new industry. We've worked alongside the Economic Development District and the Foundation to apply for a grant from the Peter Kiewit Foundation to facilitate the North Fork Development Project. We supported the development of a co-working and business incubator space downtown, which you can all see. I think we've driven by that, and that's exciting to see that happen. We submitted 13 proposals for projects that were provided. We provide information, support, and resources to more than 70 businesses and property owners in town as well. And we did launch a downtown planning process to facilitate next steps for growth and explore management structure. I know that's been a discussion point that we're having with our downtown business owners, letting them drive whether or not they want to and how they want to formulate a downtown business improvement district. So that process, again, is being led and driven by the downtown business owners to try to determine their own fate on that. So the next couple slides here are ones that are new. These are required for the city, but also very important. These are ones that you'll find in our budget document as well. But this one will give a total expenditures comparison for year to year. So you have this year compared to last year. So this is everything. This is the all funds, all operations, and everything of the entire city, going from the budget of 2021-22 to now the current budget, and we increased this just over $3 million from year to year. I can just kind of let you all look at that if you'd like. If there's any questions so far, I'd be happy to try to answer those, or we can save some for the end.
Does the debt service on this particular one include the payment of this building on that?
That would have been.
Yeah, is that
That would have been
2023? Because we
current
just
fiscal
approved
year.
that. I didn't know if that was going in.
It would show that it's paid off, so there's no numbers in that debt service.
So that's where you get the dollar decrease of 1.2 million is part of that.
Part of that is, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And the next slide just shows a series of, a graph that shows the same number from year to year on how the city budget has grown, going back to fiscal year 2013 and 14. So overall, the budget has increased, but we're not too far off from a few of the past years that we've seen.
So, Andy,
Yeah.
on this side, there's a little distinction here between the total comprehensive budget and the yearly annual operating budget, right? So you want to talk a little bit about the difference between?
So this is all funds. So this is general fund, this is water, sewer, debt service fund, health insurance. I mean, this is every fund that the city has for this. So it's different than what you would see on, for instance, if you go through the budget of looking at the general fund where police, fire, and all those. If you compare those numbers to this one, those are just a part of this overall budget. So this is all city funds, including debt service and everything. So this is a familiar chart we've seen as we look in, really when we're talking about, I think is what the topic most people are concerned about is when it comes to taxes. So the general fund is where you find the city's tax fund. That's where we have the revenues and taxes, and also the expenditures where we then turn around and utilize those taxes to implement services. So this is a chart that shows all the general fund revenue sources currently. As you can see, as we've seen, sales tax is leading that. Almost 40% of the entire general fund budget is sales tax. NPPD lease is right behind it at just over almost 17%. Keno and other revenue just over 3%. Property tax is an increase because of valuation annexations that we've seen are at about 20% right now. Charges for services just over 9%. Other taxes almost 5%, licenses, intergovernmental revenues, other interest income, and non-revenue receipts, and some of the miscellaneous ones there coming towards the end. So with an overall revenue for the general fund of $27,790,440. And this is a chart where we can just show some of the historical growth of sales tax. I'll just make a few points. You can see in the fiscal year 16, there was a half-cent voter-approved sales tax that was implemented, and then that did expire in March of 2018 and the 2019, which would have been the 19th fiscal year. So you'll see that drop off. And then consistently, we've seen really, really good sales tax increases from that point on, even exceeding what we were back then for collecting the extra half-cent.
So, speculation about the reasons behind that sales tax growth. I mean, that's steady growth from 19 to 23. So,
online sales tax that we're collecting sales tax from online sales, which has been put into place since then, is a big contributor to that increase.
That was year 15, that went in?
No, that was 20.
20.
When was the internet sales tax? Was it 19 or 20, Randy?
I believe the court decision that allowed that to take place was in 19, and then the state actually enacted enabling legislation, I believe, in 20, if I remember right. The Department of Revenue passed some regulations, but they really didn't have the teeth of statutes.
Yeah. 20 into 21 would have been the first years where we would have seen the real impact of that.
So we had started to see a significant increase in just local growth anyway, and that combined with online sales tax collections has helped
it fueled
accelerate that growth.
A lot of construction happening in town and a lot of development projects. There's just a lot of economic activity happening, and I think that's a good barometer of how well businesses are doing, and that's really, really good for us. When businesses do well, we do well. So, because we are heavily sales tax dependent.
I do want to note that part of that, I think, has to do with economic development strategies and going back to those 16, 17 years, really putting a decided focus on Norfolk as a city, changing the narrative a little bit about being open for business and encouraging development, being open to new ideas, new ways of doing things, and new people willing to invest and spend money here. I think that formula has been very important to resulting in the kind of growth that we've seen in our sales tax base, which is good. Allows us to utilize that sales tax revenue fund to keep up with city services that grow hand in hand with the growing community. So.
Well, and I think, well said, Mayor, and I would add on to that the housing study that the City Council provided for back in 2015-16, I think really made the statement of the need that we had in this community for workforce housing. And I think once, our economic development staff got a hold of that study, we kind of, and I was there. I went to conferences in the state, networked with developers and tried to get them interested in coming here. I think the council's shown that being open to some of the incentives, tax increment financing and some of those incentives to try to help redevelop ground that otherwise was not being used, just to try to help bring housing to town, I think helped tremendously in our economy here and attracting people. So I think we've done a lot of great things here over the last several years. Nebraska Public Power District lease. That one you can see is just a relatively flat, just as rates have remained flat with NPPD. Really what we've seen as far as any overall growth has been just due to system growth and load growth. And I don't foresee on the horizon any rate increases that would change that lease payment significantly. Here's one where you'll see the total assessed valuation for the city as determined by the Madison County Assessor. So you can see a jump here from 21 to 22, that almost 15%. A large part of that is the annexation, I would say, and then the rest of that is just due to valuation growth that we've had here in the community.
What was, as a reminder for public record too, the annexation in total, maybe Val has those numbers handy, but the total.
How many acres?
Yeah, new property that came in within city limits, limits through annexation.
I forgot how many acres, Randy.
We had about 6.5 square miles annexed into the city, which would increase our area by over half.
And I think it's important to remember as well that we've seen a lot of development happening, and a lot of those developments are getting on the tax rolls now. You've seen a lot of apartments being built, and again, the housing I think is also a big contributor to this growth and valuation. So a number of factors have gone into that. Levy rate comparison. We are still holding our rank as among other first-class cities in the state of the third lowest tax levy across the state of Nebraska. Randy, I meant to write this down, but you want to just review the tax levy. It's lowering slightly for this fiscal year.
Yes, it's lowering, I think, about 0.3 cents, if I remember right.
So, and later on in this presentation, I will have a slide talking about the long-term financial plan, so to show where that levy is set to go going forward. This is an informational slide, just to show where you're on a $100,000 home, if you are in Norfolk, where your tax dollars go. City of Norfolk receives approximately 16% of that bill or on a $100,000 home, $307.49. Northeast Community College receives $94. Madison County receives $374.20. Norfolk Public Schools about $1,080, and other miscellaneous levies receive about $101 of that overall tax bill per $100,000. Here are our 22-23 general fund expenditures per division and function. As it is from year to year, police and fire and admin are our largest funds. General fund is heavy personnel. It takes people to run and perform all the services that we need to get done here as a city. So you're going to see those be much larger than what you would see in maybe your utility funds. But engineering, street maintenance, I will point this out. The street maintenance might seem a little bit smaller than we've seen in some past years, but that's because I was doing that the other day too. We did separate out fleet services from the street budget and created its own fund, and that's going to help us better track the vehicle maintenance and equipment maintenance that we perform because the guys out there do that for all divisions. So we did that so we can better track the work that's being done. Parks and Recreation, approximately 11.77% of the general fund. Housing, 2%. Planning and Development, 2.5%. Library, about just over 6%. So is there any questions on this slide? And then we'll get to enterprise fund expenditures. This is one that's heavy capital. There's way more in investment in equipment and the treatment plants, and we have water mains and all kinds of projects that we have to put in as in our enterprise funds, which would be the water, sewer, and solid waste funds primarily. So their personnel is about 15% in those funds, and your capital expenditures are over half of the total funds, which I think shows too that the City Council has done a very good job of investing in our infrastructure in this community over the last number of years, as well as promoting new infrastructure to try to encourage new development. So we'll highlight a few things looking ahead that are included in this current budget that we're for this next fiscal year. We're going to continue our efforts for street maintenance and construction. We have just over $12 million in the budget for street maintenance and construction. So $1 million is around that same amount that we do from year to year for annual street maintenance contract work. And that's just different projects around the community where we have to contract out to have projects done. 1.1 million, just over that, for 8th Street from Michigan to Omaha. We have planned for next year another $4 million to widen Benjamin from 4-lane to 5-lane from 13th to 1st. 2.5 million for the bridge replacement on 1st Street at the North Fork. Just over 1.3 million for Michigan Avenue from 7th to 10th Street and Wood to 13th Street, which has been one that we've talked about here for the last few years to try to get that done. We'll have just over $1 million in mill and overlay, North 1st Street, North Victory Road, and then on East Monroe. And we'll have $925,000 for micro seal and an armor coat. For water sewer infrastructure, we have just over $6 million. North Victory Road utility extensions for about 1.4. $1.1 million for a 36-inch sanitary sewer from 4th and Monroe to 2000 Logan. We have just under 1.3 million for a 21-inch sanitary sewer line from 19th Street and Center to 805 Omaha Avenue. And then we have almost 2.3 million for grit removal building improvements at WPC. Solid waste, again, we'll continue some of that going into this next fiscal year, primarily with the truck maintenance facility and finishing that up at around $682,000. Parks, Recreation, and Trail Development, the $785,440 for landscape master plan. I do want to touch on that as we've had some questions come up about that funding. That funding has actually been put away in the capital improvement plan for the last several years. It was here before I got here, so we're talking longer than 6 or 7 years or so. So
It was 2009, actually, city
Okay.
council approved in 2009, I think allotted $1.4 million.
Okay, $1.4 million was put into the CIP, and that, so what that does is every year, money is set aside in the CIP for landscaping. So that is money, so all those projects that we have is money we have on hand. It has been budgeted and saved over time for those specific purposes. I just want to make that clear that that's not new money that we're trying to find for that. But we do anticipate spending some of that this coming year. Just over $2 million for Johnson's Park improvements, and then about 2.8 for North Fork River rehab. And I do have some information dedicated also to the Riverfront project, as I think we've had several questions on that as well. Any questions so far from council?
That, the $12 million plus figure for street maintenance and construction, I think you're getting into this, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but that comes from a variety of sources, including our CHAF funds, right?
Yep.
Which is highway allocation funds that come from the state through the gas tax, and then a variety of our own 1- and 6-year street planning purposes, but also an injection too of some ARPA funds
Yeah.
in this budget,
Yep.
right? And going back to year prior CARES Act money. So the council has used some of those discretionary funds, so to speak, to try to supplement and put in more to street construction, recognizing that the longer that maintenance is deferred, the more expensive it becomes to address it later down the road.
Just a few miscellaneous additions to the budget that we'll cover. So it's not a regular practice that we add full-time employees to the budget, but obviously when there is a need, we do discuss that need with council and we do include those in the budget. So if you'll recall back to our budget meetings we had earlier this summer, we did add one full-time employee to finance. Finance has been really struggling to try to keep up with the things that they need to as far as the reporting and the reporting. Some of those that accounting work that they need to have done. So they're doing a great job with what they have, but I think that everyone agrees that there's a lot of work being put on finance right now, especially, and that just means there's a lot of activity going on as well. So we did budget to try to get some help for them with an additional person. Another full-time employee to police. This one is split 50-50 with Norfolk Public Schools for a school resource officer. We added one full-time employee to fire. We added one full-time employee to admin, which is a management analyst. That position specifically was when we did some restructuring in admin, we created the position of admin services director to try to help oversee some of the HR roles. And we have a person dedicated to talent and recruitment. But through that, there was some funds that we were using that we existing had. So due to the turnover and changes in staff levels when they're hired versus those that left, there was some funding that we had in there to try to help with some of that risk management and just miscellaneous projects. Lyle Lutt has done a tremendous job and has a lot of work that he's done. Unfortunately, many of the things that he used to do before becoming our admin services director, he's still involved with, and so there's a lot of stress that goes along with that. So we're trying to peel away some of that from him so he can focus more on his admin services. So we're going to work on getting that management analyst hired here in this next fiscal year. For streets, we did budget for an electrician and a signal technician to try to help work primarily. Will is here if he wants to touch more on that or if the council has a question about that position specifically. Just a few other things here. Asset management system we have for $127,000. Street division, we have a pickup, some slides and a Salter replacement. Parks and recreation, vehicles and equipment. This is an interesting one, holiday decorations and lights. You might be wondering why are we spending that on lights? The lights that we have for the Christmas tree downtown are difficult to work with. They don't last. They're not very nice. Not something that you would see to last and be well used from year to year. So these are going to be some commercial grade Christmas lights for the downtown tree. And then sports complex improvements for $190,000 that we'll continue to invest at Tahoe Park. Police patrol cars, as usual, we're replacing those, and also the community service officer truck. So we will talk about there's two slides here that we're going to talk about the Johnson's Park. When I say Johnson's Park, I'm also talking about the river restoration, First Street, the bridge, everything. So what this does is it's broken that down into to the three different components of this. And I think one of the questions that I've been getting at least is, where's this funding coming from? And I think there's some confusion out there for that. So we're going to provide a breakdown of all this funding. This is a detailed breakdown of that. So you'll see on here I highlighted 4 parts that are in green. Those are what I would call city funds. So that's chaff money and water and sewer funds, primarily. So then you go up and you look in some of these other ones. So we'll just break this down. Norfolk River Rehabilitation. Lower Elkhorn NRD put in $1.03 million. And the city used Keno funds, which are reserved for parks, recreation, community betterment. That's our most flexible funds that we have. We did allocate the same amount to match what the NRD did in Keno funds as well. $1 million in ARPA funds, which are the one-time funds from the Rescue Plan Act. $725,000 came from the Norfolk Sanitary District. We got a grant from the CCCFF, from the Department of Economic Development, for $614,000. Private foundations for $457,500. Madison County put in some funding for $250,000, and another $100,000 in local fundraising, just for the Norfolk River Rehab. Then you go down to Johnson's Park. We have just over $1 million in private foundations that have donated to that project. $900,000 in local fundraising. $750,000 came from local businesses. $525,902 came from a CCCFF grant for that project as well. $435,000 for a CDBG grant. $354,508 in ARPA funds were allocated to Johnson's Park, and another $350,000 of Keno funds to go into Johnson's Park as well. And of course, you have the chaff and the water and sewer fund. And then obviously the bridge and First Street project, that's all funded by primarily by chaff, with a little bit of water fund in there because of the utility work that they need to do. So the next slide, and we can come back to this if there's questions. But
So the green numbers are tax dollars then?
well, no. Sorry, there are no tax dollars.
In this project?
Right. So
Okay.
So we have Keno. Keno revenue is something that the community voted on years and years and years ago to have. And those funds have to go towards parks and recreation, community betterment. It's a whole laundry list of things that you can allocate those funds to. And so the city traditionally has budgeted those primarily for parks and recreation. ARPA funds are American Rescue Plan Act funds. Those are one-time funds that the city got as part of the American Rescue Plan. So not taxes.
Right.
For those.
Yeah.
So chaff is our highway fund, so that is a tax as part of the gas tax, but that's collected by the state of Nebraska, and then we're just given a share of that based on amount of miles and roads and everything, and the formula the state has for that. And then the water fund, obviously, self-explanatory. Those are just user fees, but then again, you're talking, $300,000 for $400,000 of that in total for water and sewer funds. So this is all funding that we have on hand today for this.
That chaff designation within Johnson Park, is that related to some of the utility work that needed? Okay.
Also, that First Street Bridge chaff fund was part of the bond. Correct. That's not a one-time
Yes.
expense. That was
Correct.
bonded. Yeah. So over that.
And that bridge, Steve, can you remind me, I know when we had planning discussions about this, that First Street Bridge is near or at the end of its useful life anyway, right? It would have had to be replaced.
We're approaching 50 years, and it's certainly not that bridges can last longer than that, but it is approaching 50 years based on the style of construction of the multi-barrel box culvert structural lid.
So this next slide just has a pie chart that breaks down those different funds, based on the previous slide. So. I think this project is one of those where it's a really, really good example and highlight for public-private partnerships, and the hard work that a lot of people went to fundraise, partnered with Growing Together, the grants that the city applied for and did receive for that, and working with the foundations. So a lot of hard work went into making this project happen.
I would just underscore that, Andy, with discussions on this project going back to even 15, 16 in terms of planning and design, knowing that without planning and partnership formation on this, it wouldn't have been possible. And so really that first one that got the ball rolling was the partnership with the Lower Elkhorn Natural Resources District, which approved money to go into the river restoration portion of that, and was a catalyst to some of these other partnerships, and the combination of state grants and private fundraising and city budgeting, I think is prudent and reasonable, and will result in a quality of life project that's unique to anywhere else in the state.
We're almost done, I promise. So this is just an informational chart, just showing some historical trends for the Highway Allocation Fund, going back to the 2013-14 fiscal year up to present, just to show how that has grown and went down and then back up again over the course of the last several years. And this one is one we put together to show our long-term financial plan outlook. So the blue lines is fund balance, and the orange line, as you can see cutting through there, is the levy rate. So if you start here at 22, 23, and we project it out to 2031 to 2032, we do show, as you can see, that as fund balance grows, we do show the city tax levy being reduced. And I believe in this projection we're just over 24 cents. Questions?
That 2023, 2024 shows city levy rate going up, but increase there.
Yeah.
That is due to the funding of this building. Is that
It's a little bit more of a complicated answer. Yes, that's part of it, but part of it is how they put the finance office puts their modeling together for this. It always seems to have a bump for year one, but again, it's up to the council to set this levy rate.
right?
So
So you could next year say you're not in favor of that. Obviously, that would then be your beginning fund balance would then drop, because you're projecting, looks like, sales tax in at 3.9%, which is pretty conservative. I mean, from what you just showed us.
the modeling we did use for this is very conservative. We had assessed valuation increase of 5%,
Yeah, I see that.
and then we have just under 4% for sales tax increase,
So
which are both conservative.
But looking at your model, you could essentially absorb that, and then just, it'd take 2 years to catch back to your 3%, whatever you're projecting for that rate then.
Let you answer that, Sheila.
Yeah, I would agree that that's correct. And I think part of that bump is just how we're saying that what the ending balance is as of the budget year, and we want to increase that by 3% each year. And so if maybe you could keep it level, and then the ending balance just wouldn't increase that much.
Okay.
Makes me curious, if you went back 10 years ago to 12 and 13, did that long-term financial plan outlook predict where we are at today? Was it accurate?
Interesting enough, yes. And, you know, it varied from year to year, but we were predicting that we would be 30 cents to 40 cents. And now we're there to 30 cents, and now we can show it trending down.
Good. I said one question. On the previous slide, chaff, we've talked about chaff a little bit. That formula, again, it's an allocation from the state via gas tax. That formula to cities is based on lane miles? Is that how it's distributed? Is that right, Steve?
Substantially so within the formula. It's based on lane miles, yes.
So annexation will have affected that a little bit
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, we had a 17%. The annexation increased our lane miles by about 17%.
17%. Any other questions, council, for Andy while he's up here?
Yeah, so obviously, right now, we've got some issues going on with the economy, you know, and possible well, basically a recession right now. They're not calling it that, but that's what's going on. Did you have I did, I kind of went back and looked what happened after '08 as far as where sales tax and property tax and how that did and what that was gonna look like for the budget. And then, you know, is that something, do you feel, looking at those numbers from, you know, I went back on our website, went back to '09, and then looked at it from '09 to 2021, and just looked the stuff that's on the website that's provided. And it does show that in 12 and you kind of saw that earlier, but 12 and 13, and then part of 14 was pretty flat with any sort of growth, and same with sales tax. You saw it pretty flat in 13, and then because that's a year, you know, off, and then things kind of flattened out and worked back around. Is that when you figure that 3.9% when you're, or the whatever you're using for figure when you're setting your projections out that we're looking at right here, are we figuring that at a lower rate to absorb those slow times? I mean,
We don't have anything in the long-term financial plan trying to forecast recessions or spikes in the economy. That 3.9% is what our sales tax has grown, the average compound growth rate in our sales tax for the last 10 years. Here lately has been growing much better than that. But if you look at the 10 years and calculated compounded growth rate, that's what that 3.9% is. The assessed valuation somewhat similar. We look back 10 years and see what the compound growth rate is in assessed valuation. It's actually, because of that spike we had this year because of the large annexation, that would have that growing at, I think it's about 6.29%. If you back that out, it's growing at 5.7%, and we use 5% in the long-term financial plan. But we did not go in there and look at what happens if we have a recession. That's just long-term averages. So if we have a recession this year, that first year long-term financial plan probably is not going to be as good as it looks in there.
right.
The idea behind this thing isn't to try and predict year by year what's going to happen. It's trying to look at the long-term averages and say, this is what we think is going to happen long-term, knowing some years are going to be better than that, some years are going to be worse than that. And it probably is not going to average out to what's in that long-term financial plan, but we don't have a super good crystal ball to go in and try and predict that there's going to be a recession next year. I think that's quite possible, but if you listen to the White House, I'd probably say that no, that's not going to happen. And who am I to second guess the White House?
I think that's been the biggest area of concern I've gotten when I've spoken with people, is the fact that, you know, the economy could be slowing down. We're looking at our budget this year at a little bit higher rate than traditional, as far as what's being voted on. And can you sustain that, for one? And is that going to mess with the mill levy next year, right? Because it's affordable this year, but is it affordable next year? That's, I think, the biggest question I get. And obviously, I see what it does to the mill levy, and I know that we did ask to finance this building and get it paid for, so we're not paying interest with taxpayer dollars. But I do know that there is an opportunity next year to, it'll be asked, but it doesn't have to happen.
And we've got good fund balance, so we could absorb some
Right,
negative.
you project the fund balance, you could lose, it'd be about $600,000-700,000 off next year. Right? I mean, that's just me looking at this budget.
I'll say that again.
Right, with that's where you could be the difference in the fund balances. From where you're projecting with this, where this shows with making the 3% growth, and then without the 3% growth, about 700, 800,000 probably the difference.
Yes, that would be about right.
All right, that's what it looks like. Looking at, you know.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
For this year's, for the upcoming fiscal year's budget, can you remind us what the beginning fund balance or the emergency reserve is projected to be at? Somebody have that handy?
Sheila might be able to beat me to it.
About 8 million.
7.4?
Sounds right.
7.4 million.
Which, if I remember correctly, is almost 16% of the overall operating budget, which is where it's recommended to be. Is that accurate?
This is actually 25%. The beginning balance is 25% of operating expenditures. We always look at the ending balance.
Okay.
So our 4 million, that's the one that's a little closer to 16. Actually, a little bit below that, because we did use some of those reserves to pay off the debt service on this admin building.
It's around 15%, which is what is considered the emergency reserve fund.
And we always budget very conservative, so fund balance. If we have a bad economy, I don't think it's going to go down millions of dollars.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Andy. This is a public hearing, so anyone wishing to make comment can do so, as we typically do with our public hearings, governed by Robert's Rules of Order. So we allow for anyone to have one opportunity to come up and have a maximum of 5 minutes, and the time will be kept by our city clerk. So anyone wishing to make comment can do so now.
Jim McKenzie, I'll try and fit this in 5 minutes. First of all, my question on the budget documents overall, in each one of your divisional expenditure details, you've got a dollar increase and a percent increase or decrease, the last two columns. Those all reflect increase and decreases over the level 3 budget. Do you intend to improve the level 3 budget or the level 4 budget?
This budget is based on the level 4 budget.
Okay. My suggestion would be the next time you do these, to have your dollar and percent increases go with the level 4. Because otherwise, when you're trying to scan this, you're getting numbers that aren't accurate as to what you're planning to approve. So that would be my suggestion. Next item, I don't know, I'm just gonna mention this. When I look at the Park Division budget, the detail, and I'm not sure why it's this way, but when I look at 1920 actual expenditures for salaries and wages, it's $1,178,966. 22-23 is $1,833,108, a 55% increase in 3 years. So I'm not sure why that particular division went up 55%, but that's what appears from the budget. One other item on your budget documents, you reference a $100,000 home. Realtor.com, the only residential property I could find for $100,000 or less was an old trailer house. So I would suggest updating your documents to be a $200,000 home, a $250,000 home, so when people look at this, it's more realistic to what the costs are and what homes are actually living in. And then I went through and I looked at the CHAF fund, the CIP, and one of the others, and I kind of looked at the items that were included in there, and I'm saying, what could we actually pull out of here and use for streets? When I look at the CHAF, it's got $60,000 for underground power at 3rd and Brosh, $100,000 for underground power at 1st and Norfolk, which I assume are for looks. The CIP has $636,000 for unspecified council priority projects. I think that could be used for streets. $785,000 for landscaping, $85,000 for wayfinding, and the $785,000 for landscaping that you said is earmarked back to 2011. When I look at your capital projects fund, I see landscaping per project master plan 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2021, 21, 22. So that adds up to pretty close to that 785,000. So I'm not sure where you got 2011, but it looks like it's more recent. And the other thing I'll mention about that is those are just placeholders in that CIP. You guys change the CIP all the time. Nothing has to be concrete in there. That could be reallocated to streets as well. And in the ARPA funds, I see a park master plan for $100,000, downtown master plan for $100,000, infrastructure improvements for the North Fork of the Elkhorn River for $750,000, Johnson Park improvements for $354,000, and various other improvements for $1,005,000. I have no idea what that is. It doesn't break out any detail. Those could all be street. So my point is, I don't see a concerted effort for street repairs. It seems like we have money for everything else, but we don't have money for street repair. That's my frustration, and I think that's the frustration of a lot of people in the community. One other thing I'll mention, there's a chart in the budget book called The History of Bond Indebtedness, and pictures sometimes worth 1,000 words. This is your chart out of your own document. From 2020 and 21, it was roughly 22 million, to 2 years later, it's 48 million, so it went up 118, your bond indebtedness went up 118% in 2 years. If this ballot issue were to pass, and if conservatively you spend $70 million, your bond indebtedness goes to 118 million. So I sorry I had to tape an extra piece of paper on here to fit it on here, and that is according to scale. So your bond indebtedness goes from 22 to 118 million to 436% increase in 3 years. So that's scary. That's scary for the city, that's scary for the citizens, that's scary long time for our financial future. The chart about the property tax, us being 3rd lowest, I would ask that the next time you do that, you include the airport authority levy in there, because those other cities that you're comparing against, at least the ones, Kearney, Columbus, Fremont, and Grand Island, if you add the airport levy in those, and most of them include it, that's not an accurate chart. And I would compare it to the 4 largest cities in our area, so it's reasonable, and not a bunch of smaller cities or metro cities. My property taxes are up 126% over the past 9 years. Josh, you said ARPA funds went to street repair. I couldn't find any that went to street repair, so if you can show me where those are at, I'd like to find them.
The First Street Bridge project would not have been replaced if not for the riverfront. My understanding that the last bridge inspection report on that was in fair condition. We have lots of other bridges in fair condition. I've never heard any talk of that being replaced until this riverfront project came up. So to say that that was going to be replaced is disingenuous at best and maybe something else at worst. So, you know, it's a frustrating to hear you say we're going to replace that. It's never been talked about before. And so that's just a box culvert. And if you need to replace a box culvert, it's not going to cost 5.4 million or whatever you put toward that. So that's another issue I'll bring up. That's what I've got. So any questions for me?
Only one point I'd make though is on that bond indebtedness. It's a fair point that you bring up because 20 million of that is Benjamin and
Yep.
that bond that just passed, which I feel that's a frustrating issue. I think that we might have. It's hard to wrap your mind around how that went about, but because back in like 2013, 2012, there was talk about doing Benjamin at that time, and the budget was a lot less for doing that. And I don't know, but it couldn't be certain. But I think East Norfolk Avenue Bridge, when that kind of failed, some of those funds got messed around and we got to kick that can down the road a ways. I think, which was unfortunate because obviously prices go up. But that is one area that you're right. That's an area that's kind of a sore. When you look at it, it's kind of tough to stomach the fact that we had to come up with that bonding, and there was no way to pay for that out of the CHAF all at once. And it does shorten up the CHAF budget by 1.2 million each year for the next 20 years. So yeah, that is a good point. The only one is that on that indebted bondness, the only reason that would happen is if it's a voter passed. Right.
But
So
it's important for the voters to know that.
Right, yeah.
It's important for the city to get that information out to voters so they know what that looks like. I mean, the citizens don't know. The citizens are out there in the dark, and they don't really understand what the implications are of those spending issues. So they need to understand. That's why I brought it up.
But it is fair to point out, though, on the two we're talking about that are going to make that indebtedness look crazy big, you got to have a half-cent sales tax passed to even do it, which I understand is burden on the public. So we've had the discussion. You're right on that. And the other one is coming out of the CHAF fund, which we do continue to receive. So it's not something that would end up going on to a property tax burden. You know, just to be fair, that
It is well.
You could make the
Sure.
statement that you're creating entities that are going to be staffed and funded, and that you might see something happen there. So I do appreciate that side of the argument. But
Yeah, the other thing I'll say about that is, and I've said it before to some of you, is that by putting that 0.5% sales tax on for 20 years, you've maxed out your sales tax for 20 years. You have no other bullets left. So any other expenditures that you're going to want to do is going to be a property tax increase if it's anything out of the normal routine stuff. So that's where, you know, I mentioned my property tax increase and where it's at. When you get that you've taken all your spending potential for sales tax and it's gone, you're going to have those other, that's what you're going to have to draw upon. The one other thing, there were no tax dollars supposedly spent on the riverfront project. Well, the CHAF the CHAF funds are obviously city tax dollars. NRD funds, the citizens pay into that, those are tax dollars. ARPA funds, the citizens pay into that, those are tax dollars. SID funds, the Norfolk citizens pay into that, those are tax dollars. Madison County funds, the citizens pay into that, those are tax dollars. Those are all tax dollars. So to say that there's no tax dollars spent is wrong.
I think that's fair, Jim. Semantically, I think the intent behind saying that was that there were not tax increases necessarily imposed on citizens to pay for that. And I appreciate you pointing these things out. You've obviously shown a passion since your retirement with the city of Norfolk to follow these budget proceedings very closely and how the city spends its money, and that's good, the watchfulness of the citizens, so we appreciate that. And as I've said before, we've had good discussions in the past about community growth projects that you seemed to support at the time. I would just tack on to what Councilman Clausen said about bonded indebtedness and the fact that some of these projects that required us to take on some debt were projects that had been kicked down the road for some years, including Benjamin Avenue. That was a project that since I came onto the council in 2012 was talked about, and just the trigger was never pulled to get the project started and going. There's various reasons for that. It's a complicated project, but the fact at the end of the day is it's one that needed to get done. And the longer we waited to do it, the more expensive it was going to become. And so projects like that, projects like Brosh Avenue reconstruction, which is another street I've heard a lot about in town, and I think the outcome of reconstruction was good there. I take issue with your assertion that there's not enough money going to streets. I mean, we have done a lot, I think, as illustrated in this budget document, to put as much money into street repair and maintenance as is possible within prudent budgeting right now. And $12 million plus for next year's street repair budget, I think, is probably unprecedented. Is that correct, Steve? As much as we've put in street repair any time in our community's history. And we got creative and able to do that. As Councilman Clausen pointed out, the spike that you point to in bonded indebtedness, not really fair, I don't think, because that would have a revenue source tied to it, and you know that. And it's also up to the voters to decide whether they want to do that or not. So again, fair to have these discussions, and we're happy to do it. That's why we have these hearings. That's why we put this information out there. All of this information, the entire budget, will be on the city website. Anyone, anytime, is welcome to review it, look over it with fine-tooth comb, and come and ask these questions and have these discussions. That's what this is all about. That said, anyone else wishing to make comment during this public hearing?
One more
do
comment.
so.
Jim did make a really good point about placeholders. You know, where we do with placeholders. You know, in the budget, and I think that can get blurry and fuzzy. It does, and I think he makes a good point with that. I've been in a situation before in a meeting. All of a sudden, you see how much we have in placeholders in parks and trails, and it's scheduled out for so many years, and all of a sudden you've got funds tied up for something, and you're not quite sure when or why and how that got put there. And so I think that is a good point, Jim, and I think that's something we should have continued discussion on. If there is an openness there with some of these placeholders to move some of those funds to streets, if that's, I mean, Josh, you obviously made a point about what's being invested in streets, but he does make a good point that there is maybe some funds there that we can, if there are streets that need to be looked at right away, you know, that we can look at. I'm not saying it has to happen, but I think it would be a good discussion to have in some sort of either subcommittee or one of these meetings that we have on how we can address that, make that more, I don't know, transparent, I guess, so that you're not having citizens with questions about where money's going or why it's going there.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, Shane, I can say that landscaping plan that was in question was approved under Mayor Fuchman's administration. City Council in 2009 allotted $1.4 million to that. There was a study where a good amount of funds was already expended to do that study, but the money for the plan never got put into the budget. And I think some of that did happen. Some of that money probably went to other places. And so people who see that as a need or an improvement in the community then could also say, well, in 2009, this was put in place. This was put in code. Where did that go? So, I mean, you look at it both sides. I mean, this, yeah, it was put into the capital improvement program. It has not been allotted till now. Some of the other things mentioned, I think, were landscaping plans tied to specific projects, Brosh and Benjamin. This landscaping plan, again, approved in 2009, has not been fully implemented. So that's where that money first originated, through approval by previous council. Anyone else wishing to make public comment? Okay, seeing and hearing no one. Do we have any other discussion among the council or any other staff input? Again, this is a public hearing. There's no action to be taken on the budget tonight. That will be at the next council meeting.
Do we want to have discussion about the Parks and Rec with the 50? Just to,
Oh, sure.
Jim brought up
Yeah,
the point of 55%. I thought that was another point he brought up. That was something worth discussing and maybe talk about what. I think you said 55% change in that. Something maybe we could talk about.
I think the assertion was made that there was an increase in Parks and Rec personnel costs.
Right.
I guess I was kind of caught off guard with that question, going back to 2019 and 20, so I feel like I'd probably need to go and look at a couple things. I'm looking at the budget sheet right here. I have my budget.
Jim, is that the one that's on the online that you pull up? Yeah, I've seen those. That's the one that's on our website. When you go on our website, you click on, that's the one that pops up. And that, I'll be honest, is somewhat confusing, because that's the ones I remember. Like, I had a great meeting with our accountants a couple weeks ago. Actually, about an hour and 45-minute long meeting. Thank you for having the meeting. But I went through and used the same thing that he's looking at, and it does get a little bit confusing. And then you guys went into great detail, and thank you, and kind of explained that is you've got like 2 or 3 different levels of accounting for that audit, and the numbers that go into that are somewhat just simply because of the way budgets, and maybe you can explain it better. Sheila, you did a nice job explaining it to me that day of when we had those audits and they're online, the difference between that audit and then the budget that's sitting in front of us, and why those numbers look different because of what they have to, the way they're doing their auditing on it. Not saying that what Jim has, but it was confusing to me too. So, I mean.
Right, because our annually, we have to, in our audit, report on 3 different bases of accounting: full accrual, modified accrual, and cash basis. And you were looking at some full accrual numbers, but we budget on a cash basis. So, and those are in the back of our audit report. And, but yeah, Jim's looking at cash basis. And I'm trying to remember what year we combined Parks and Recreation.
That's what I was just thinking. I think that might have been the year that we changed that, because we did put all those under one department, create a Department of Parks and Recreation.
Right.
Because before that, they were separated out.
So without digging into the fine details of it, I don't know the answer right now on why those expenses went up over the last few years.
I was surprised I didn't see a huge increase in personnel.
If you,
Nate,
any comment needs to be made at the podium.
Nathan Powell, Parks and Rec Director. Yeah, I think those increases were bringing recreation, which mainly was aquaventure, over into parks. And all those expenses were combined, and that's why it's such an increase.
Okay.
Yep.
That would make sense. Any other questions or comments, council, or discussion prior to closing these hearings? Okay. If not, I do want to take a moment to thank the city staff for their work once again in putting forward this budget plan. It is a long and laborious process. Particularly Randy Gates and Sheila Rios, our finance team, who have been doing this for quite a few years. I won't put you on the spot to ask how many, but we're talking decades in some instances, and not just years. But their thoroughness, professionalism, working with our city administrator and other public department division heads gives our elected officials, I think, a lot of confidence that year to year we can expect a budget to be presented to us that is reasonable, responsible, and particularly in these last few years positions the community for further growth and prepares us for the future in a prudent way. I think the numbers reflect the fact that Norfolk's in one of its strongest fiscal conditions in its history, that we maintain a healthy reserve. We're addressing infrastructure needs, promoting public safety, and enhancing quality of life that will help continue further growth. Our population has grown because of some of the new housing development over the last few years, and that's reflected in this budget as well. And all the while, we are able to slightly lower the levy and maintain the third lowest property tax levy in the state. So those are facts of the matter. And again, we appreciate public participation in this process. Anyone watching at home can go to City of Norfolk website and examine the budget and this budget plan, and we welcome and encourage you to do so and be part of the process. And if there's nothing else in terms of comment or discussion, we will close these hearings and adjourn this meeting, and the budget will be again presented and considered by the full council next week at our regular council meeting. Thank you.